what you're doing is pushing yourself to become more novel in the way that you're solving the problem in front of you. And that's where you start to create more interesting ideas, more exciting, innovative, unusual ideas about ways you could solve this particular problem in front of you. Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want to once more feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode where we're going to be talking about the 5 elements of strategic thinking. Now, if you read blogs, listen to podcasts, audiobooks, etc., read books around strategy and around leadership, you'll often hear people advocate the idea of being more strategic. And quite often people don't really explain what they mean by that. What does it mean to be more strategic in your day-to-day work? And I probably do it as well on this podcast. I'm sure there are many times in previous episodes where I've advocated the idea of being strategic without really defining exactly what I mean by that. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I did an episode on the 4 building blocks of strategy, and that is a really useful framework for when you are creating a strategy or when you're testing a strategy that's being presented to you, perhaps at a governing board meeting. But that in itself isn't actually the whole picture. There's also a mindset or a way of thinking which will help you to become more strategic. And if you apply the 5 elements of strategic thinking I'm going to be talking to you about in this episode with the 4 building blocks of strategy I talked about a couple of weeks ago, that gets you a huge way towards answering that question of what do you mean by being more strategic? So this week's episode, we're going to be focusing in on 5 simple things that you can do, ways to structure your thinking, which will help you to be a more strategic thinker. So many people have told me that this podcast really helps them, which is great because helping people is why I create these weekly episodes. I also hear from a lot of people who need a bit more support. And for those schools, I facilitate strategy away days for governors and leadership teams. I guide heads and chairs of governors through the creation and implementation of new strategic plans. And I lead regular one-to-one strategy advice calls with heads and directors of development. And the best part of my job is hearing from those people I work with that they're clearer about what to prioritise day to day, they're better able to lead change in their schools, and they feel happier and more confident that they're making good strategic decisions. So anytime you feel like you need a bit of extra help, just drop me a message so we can have a chat. You'll find my contact details at www.consultjuliette.co.uk. So you've heard me say in previous episodes that I'm not a big fan of jargon, and in the world of strategy in particular, it's often used to make things seem more complicated than they are. So in this sense, I'm going to be asking for your forgiveness because I'm going to be using a little bit of jargon in this episode. The reason I'm doing it, and I'm doing it on purpose, is because I want to be able to give some structure to this idea of strategic thinking. Now, one of the things I did a number of years ago when I was starting to think more depth about strategy and strategic thinking was to dive into the definition of strategic thinking. And I have to say that when you go into the academic literature, it's not that helpful. It defines it in all sorts of psychology terms about ways of thinking that actually still don't get us that much further to the answer of what do we mean by strategic thinking. So what I did was I developed the 5 elements of strategic thinking. These were the 5 things which are not complicated but come up frequently in the academic literature around strategic thinking. And then you can work your way through 1 to 5 in a very simple way, which I'm going to talk you through today, And if you can be doing these 5 things on a regular basis and practicing them so you're getting better, then this is going to be taking you a huge way forward in terms of elevating your strategic thinking. First of all, before I dive into the details here, I don't want to overwhelm you. A lot of this is about practice. And if you're listening to this thinking, I'm not really a natural strategic thinker, then that's fine. All you need to do is take one of these ideas, practice it for a couple of weeks really kind of consciously, and then move on to the next one. And then by the time you get to all 5, you then have a toolkit, if you like, for how you can approach certain problems or certain conversations, certain meetings in a more strategic way. And I promise you, the more you practice it, the easier it will become. Once strategic thinking becomes more natural to you, you don't need to hold on to this framework. This is a way of practicing something. Once strategic thinking is well within your comfort zone, you don't need to keep harping back to all of these 5 elements. You'll be doing it naturally in the way that you're thinking and approaching problems. Okay, so with that in mind, let's dive into the first one, and that is creative thinking. Now, especially within schools, we hear a lot of talk about the importance of creative thinking. And the definition that I use for this is problem solving with relevance and novelty. And I think what's really important here is that we're not talking about abstract creativity to do with artistic merit or anything like that. We're talking about focusing on a problem and then solving it, but with novelty. And it's that novelty that makes it creative. So a couple of tips on how to structure your creative thinking. Firstly, it's really important that you have a mindset where you can generate lots of different ideas without judging them. So you are putting lots of different ideas down on a piece of paper, either digitally or physically, or on a whiteboard with a team. But you're moving on to creating more and more and more solutions or ideas around the problem that you're thinking about without judging any of them. This is about brainstorming a wide variety of ideas. When you do that, what you're doing is pushing yourself to become more novel in the way that you're solving the problem in front of you. And that's where you start to create more interesting ideas, more exciting, innovative, unusual ideas about ways you could solve this particular problem in front of you. And that's where we start to find the creative thinking. And if you've ever done one of the exercises around creative thinking, you'll often find that the first few ideas that you generate are quite easy and normally quite boring, quite obvious. And when you then push yourself to create the 15th idea of how to solve this problem, that's when you are forced to become more creative because you've already ticked off all the obvious answers. And that's the frame of mind we're looking to emulate by brainstorming lots of ideas, but continuing to brainstorm them without judging them, so that you're constantly looking for novelty in the way that you're solving that problem. A couple of things you can do to generate more ideas when you run out of ideas. One thing is to look at the problem that you're solving from other people's shoes. So place yourself into, I often talk about this alongside stakeholders. So if you've got a list of stakeholders who are involved in your schools, that would be pupils, staff, parents, alumni, the external community, and then within the staff, obviously you've got teaching staff and support staff, leadership, middle leadership, etc., etc. Actively put yourself into each of those different stakeholder shoes and then look at the problem again and think about how you solve the problem from their perspective. Often that will generate another slew of ideas, another handful of ideas that you can be considering. Another thing that you can do, again, once you run out of ideas, is to think about how similar problems are solved in other sectors. So if you think about beyond education, beyond schools, how is a similar problem solved? And often, not always, but often I find that there's definitely inspiration from things like customer service, things like the way that technology is used to streamline and efficiency around service delivery. There are all sorts of areas in the wider not-for-profit and public sector world, as well as within the commercial world, different ideas that we can take that can then help us to generate more novel ways of solving the problems in front of us. And this actually is sometimes where governors really come into their own, because their day-to-day job will be in a different sector. Sometimes, not always, but if it is in a different sector, they're bringing a different perspective to how a similar problem is solved in their sector that can then create a novel and new idea for how to solve it within your school. And then finally, within creative thinking, really actively consider the unusual knowledge or experience that you can bring to this problem, and only you can bring to this problem. Think about hobbies, think about prior careers, think about conversations that you have with your partner or your family or your friends. Think about different perspectives that you have on the world because of the unique set of knowledge, experience, and the journey that you have taken through life to this point. What does that give you in terms of a novel, new perspective on the problem that you're trying to solve? Once you've thought through those different elements, so looking at the problem from different people's shoes, thinking about different sectors and how they solve that problem, and then thinking about the unique experience that you can bring to the problem, probably you've generated a lot more ideas to how to solve the problem in front of you than you ever thought possible. And generally speaking, it's a really good idea to do this perhaps solo to begin with, so on your own to begin with, because that's how a lot of people generate novel ideas, is by working individually and then coming together as a team to share those ideas. And often when we share those ideas, we then spark new ideas by combining different thoughts on the whiteboard in front of us as well. So that's the first element of strategic thinking. It's absolutely critical, and that is creative thinking. Without creative thinking, it's highly likely that you're just repeating the things that you're already doing, and you're not pushing the boundaries of possible solutions to problems that you're considering. Okay, so that's element number one, creative thinking. The second element of strategic thinking is called systems thinking. And again, we tend to hear this talked about a fair amount within the education sector. Now, normally within education, this is used to describe the whole education system and the way that it's working together. But it's actually really relevant to think about the system within your school as well. So systems thinking, I define this as visualizing an interconnected web of people and processes, each with ambiguous cause and effect relationships. So let's dive into each of those elements of that definition briefly. So firstly, visualizing. You don't have to be a visual thinker to be doing systems thinking, but quite often, especially in the early days when you're practicing this skill, it's quite useful to actually jot down a system as you are brainstorming it, and to use a mind mapping technique where you've got each process or person or department within the system within a circle, let's say, and then lines connecting them in terms of the way that they interconnect. If you actually visualize it and put it on a piece of paper, put it on a whiteboard, then what you're going to find is, as you plot out the connections between people and processes and departments, it becomes an interconnected web, which is the second part of this definition. It is a complex web of linkages between all of these different people and processes. So let's give a really concrete example by what I mean by this. So let's think about fundraising. We often talk in fundraising about building a culture of philanthropy within a school. It's very hard to define sometimes what we actually mean by that. One way of thinking about that is to visualize, write down the interconnected web of people and processes that interact within your school community in order to create a positive culture of philanthropy. So that would mean you'd have a whole variety of circles with different stakeholder groups, pupils, parents, maybe different ages of pupils as well, different parents of different parts of the school, different types of staff groupings, leadership, governors, external community, beneficiaries for the fundraising that you're doing. Put each of those into a circle. Think about the processes involved around your donations processing, around your fundraising processes, and jot those out as well with each element of that process. So maybe your database, your website, etc., all in circles. and then start to connect them. Now, you can do this in a variety of different ways, but you could, for example, think about your giving day that you're planning and all of the different connections between these different stakeholder groups, these different processes, and you're going to end up with a really entangled web of different connections between these different elements. Now, the second half of that definition that I gave you around systems thinking is about cause and effect relationships and the fact that these are ambiguous. Now, the cause and effect relationships will vary depending on the different things that you've got on your interconnected web of systems thinking. So it might be within your giving day that you have a connected web between the communications that you're sending out to parents digitally through various different formats, the parents themselves and how much attention and time they're able to give this particular project, and then asking them to go through to a website in order to actually enact their donation with an online donation. And it might be that there's a cause and effect there, that the parents aren't going to go onto that website and make a donation unless you're pushing out the comms messages around the impact, the positive impact of the project that you're fundraising for. But at the same time, there might also be a cause and effect that actually if there's a huge amount of other information being pushed out to the parents that same day about some school trips and residentials that are coming up, that actually the amount of attention that the parents are placing on the giving day is diminished because their attention is being drawn away by other urgent deadlines and communications that are coming out from the school about the residential and the school trip. That might mean that actually the cause and effect is unexpected. It's not something that you in your fundraising plan would have anticipated, but it is something that when you realise that that's a possibility, you understand, okay, I need to be going and talking to the school office and understanding when there's going to be other big pushes of information out to parents, and then when is it optimal from us in the development team to put our giving day information out to parents, because we don't want them to be bombarded on one particular day. Now, you might not have necessarily spotted that. You might have done, but you might not necessarily have spotted that unless you'd actually thought in a systems thinking way about all the different ways in which the ambiguous cause and effect relationships between the different parts of your interconnected web of people and processes are all interacting. And the word ambiguous is really important here as well, because it doesn't always operate the way you think it will. There'll be kind of random or stochastic, unexpected things that will happen that can interrupt the system. There might be unexpected website downtime for the online giving platform, for example, which are either anticipated or not anticipated, depending on whether it's planned maintenance or not, which you also might affect that cause and effect relationship in an ambiguous or unexpected way. So I think when we're talking about being strategic, we're talking about the ability to think through this system and to understand the system, to understand the ways in which unexpected or ambiguous cause and effect relationships can impact on the outcomes that you're looking to generate. So when you are able to jot it down, again, it's often best to do this individually to begin with, and then to do it as a team so that you're sharing that understanding, you're widening everybody's understanding of the system, but you're also ensuring you're all seeing it in a similar way so that when you're solving problems together, you're able to visualize the system in a similar way. But certainly practicing systems thinking as a team will definitely enhance your ability to think strategically when it really matters. So that's systems thinking. Let's think now about the third element of strategic thinking, which is directional thinking. And this is actually relatively straightforward compared to the first two. This is about thinking through time. This is about understanding that our decision making that we're focusing on today can both be informed by the past in terms of collecting data about what's happened in the past, and needs to be aware of what might happen in the future. So first of all, when you're thinking about a decision you need to be making, you're wanting to be more strategic about it, directional thinking will encourage you to think about what lessons can we learn from the past. Have we tried something similar? If so, what happened? Maybe other schools have tried something similar, and if so, what happened? How can we use data or qualitative information about things that have happened in the past to inform our decision making now, today? And then secondly, when you're thinking about directional thinking, you need to be thinking about what might play out over time. So if you've done that systems thinking piece, there might be additional cause and effect relationships, other parts of the system which actually might become more important over time, Alternatively, you might want to think about unintended consequences that could play out over time of the decision that you're making now. And this is often associated with the consideration of risk. So when you're thinking about a decision, a strategic decision, obviously you want to be thinking about the outcomes that are positive and how you're going to maximize the positive outcomes. You also want to be thinking about the risk of negative outcomes. And so thinking about unintended consequences over time is an important part of building in that consideration of risk and negative consequences. Okay, so we've got our 3 elements of strategic thinking so far: our creative thinking, systems thinking, and directional thinking. That's thinking through time. I want you to put those to one side for a moment, because as I talk about the 4th and 5th elements of strategic thinking, these two come as a pair. And so we need to think about these two in partnership with each other. So the 4th element of strategic thinking is divergent thinking. Now, in the divergent thinking stage, we want to be opening up our idea generation, creating lots of ideas, not judging them, and really opening up the discussion. It's often called brainstorming. Obviously, it's very closely linked to the creative thinking that we were talking about earlier, but it could also include systems thinking or directional thinking as well. And in this divergent thinking stage, we have a mindset of, I am not going to judge any idea that comes from anybody else in the room. I am not going to censor my own thinking through some kind of censorship around, I don't want to look silly in front of my teammates. I am just going to be an idea generation machine. I'm going to generate loads of ideas. We're going to document them, and we're not going to judge them as we go. Now, this divergent thinking stage is really important for strategic thinking. And although, as I said, it's very closely linked to creative thinking, it's much, much wider than just creative thinking. It is a mindset that encourages you to really open up the conversation, the meeting, the minds of the people around the table, to really look at the whole world around them and create lots and lots of different alternative solutions to the problem that you're solving. The reason this is slightly different from creative thinking is because divergent thinking is then partnered with a second stage called convergent thinking. And in the academic literature, we often hear about divergent and convergent thinking spoken together as being stage 1 and stage 2 of strategic thinking. In the convergent thinking stage, this is where we are looking to actually make a decision. So we are narrowing down our options. We are analysing ideas on the table. We are slowly taking things off the table as being not practical or not the right solution that we want to be enacting, until finally we come to a decision around how we're going to solve the problem that we're considering. Now, it's really important to understand that these two stages, divergent and convergent thinking, are best done separately. It's really unhelpful, especially in a team environment, but also in terms of your mindset as well, if you're trying to both generate ideas in a divergent mindset and simultaneously judge those ideas in a convergent mindset, because it doesn't lead to the generation of lots of ideas. And it's only through that divergent stage of generating lots of ideas that we're likely to really hit on an idea which is the best solution for the problem that we're solving. So in a way, your 5 elements of strategic thinking, your first 3, so your creative, systems and directional thinking, can then be used within both the divergent and convergent thinking stages. Although we often find that in the convergent thinking stage, we're sort of closing down our creative thinking a little, but we might be using our systems and directional thinking to analyse the various different ideas on the table in order to work out which one we're going to go with. So those are the 5 elements of strategic thinking. You've got your creative, systems and directional thinking, and you've got this mindset of having separate divergent and convergent thinking as well. Hopefully that's not too jargon filled. It gives you a structure that you can use to practice and to do a bit of an audit, if you like, on your team. Which of those skills are you really confident with? Which of those thinking mindsets are you perhaps not utilising to the best of your abilities? And quite often when I talk to the leadership teams, fundraising teams, governors that I do workshops with, I often do find that they will reflect as a group that they are naturally pulled towards some of these ways of thinking, but that they're ignoring or not spending enough time on some other ways of the strategic thinking. And often, but not always, they reflect on things like the convergent thinking, so the analytical decision-making process is often more comfortable than the divergent thinking or creative thinking that I'm encouraging them to do. That might not be the case in your team. You might be naturally drawn towards that creative and divergent thinking mindset. But what I think is really helpful is maybe as a group and as individuals, think about which of these styles of thinking are you really comfortable with. You're just well within your comfort zone. You do them naturally. You don't even need to think about it. And which of these do you feel like you want to practice a little bit more? Don't try and do all of them from scratch, but maybe in future upcoming meetings, there's one or two of these that you're going to really focus on in order to up-level that general strategic thinking that you're able to do as a team. And I think it's really important to understand that not everyone's going to be exceptional at all of 5 of these elements. And that's why we need diversity in our teams so that we can, as a team, be exceptional at these 5 different areas. Before I leave you, I'm going to talk about your secret weapon. Now, obviously, understanding these 5 elements of strategic thinking, understanding the 4 building blocks of strategy I spoke about a couple of weeks ago are really important, and they can be secret weapons as well. But there's another secret weapon that you really have at your fingertips. It's within your control, but you'll find that most people don't use it. And that is carving out time to think. Sometimes we can sit around a table as a team and really proactively go through a strategic thinking process which comes up with the best results. Often, however, our best ideas come to us when we're not expecting it. Our best ideas come to us when we're walking the dog or playing with the kids, or we're doing something which is using part of our brain, but where part of our thought process can be working on something behind the scenes. And it's when we have carved out that time to think, and that might be as simple as sitting on a bench somewhere quiet and secluded in your school, thinking around a particular problem that you're looking to solve in the next week or so, but allowing your brain to freewheel a little bit and not being really focused in on, I must solve this problem within the next 10 minutes. If you can do that, if you can carve out the time to think, you will be doing better than most other leaders. And that statement is based on my experience of working with school leaders, but it's also based on the research in the commercial or the business world about leaders telling researchers that they just don't have the time to think. They don't have the time to create strategy, to really think strategically. And that is because we allow the operational side of our work to swamp the strategic thinking that we need to be doing as leaders. Now, if you can find your way, your secret way, your unique way of carving out that time to think, that is going to give you a massive advantage over lots of other people, and it's going to really accelerate your career progress, but also your school's ability to act and think strategically. Now, on this particular note, I have a previous episode called Take Control of Your Time, which is episode 130. I'm going to link to it in the episode notes, but that is a really useful partner episode in order to harness that secret weapon that you can have at your fingertips, which is having time to think in the first place. That's it for this week. I love to hear your feedback. Let me know which of these 5 elements of strategic thinking come naturally to you. Which are you going to be practicing? Let me know how you're doing with carving out time to think based on the ideas I shared with you on that previous episode. I love to hear your feedback on the thoughts and the ideas that I share with you in the podcast. That's it for this time. Have a strategic week, and I'll talk to you again next time. Bye then. Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available, and if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.com directional.co.uk/podcast.